Now, the latest from the manslaughter trial of Michael Jackson's doctor. On Wednesday, prosecutors played a disturbing recording of the singer speaking in a slow, slurred voice.
A voice, slow and slurred, almost impossible to recognize. It belongs to the most famous entertainer who ever lived, recorded in secret 6 weeks before he died. And when the world finally heard it, played in a hushed courtroom, grown men wept. This is the story of Michael Jackson's last recordings, the whispered audio, the final filmed rehearsals, the haunting words he left behind. Some of it is beautiful, some disturbing, and all of it is real. The whisper on the iPhone. Let us start with the recording itself, because it is the one that stunned an entire courtroom into silence. On the 10th of May, 2009, roughly 6 weeks before Michael Jackson died, his personal doctor, Conrad Murray, secretly recorded him speaking on his iPhone. Nobody outside that room knew the recording existed. It only came to light years later, in 2011, when prosecutors played it aloud during Murray's trial. And when they did, the reaction in the courtroom was immediate and devastating. Jackson's siblings were there to hear it. His brother Jermaine wiped away tears. His brother Randy put a hand over his mouth because the voice coming out of the speakers barely sounded human. The Michael Jackson on that tape is heavily sedated. His words come out slow, dragging, at times almost impossible to make out. And yet, through the fog, what he is talking about is heartbreakingly pure.
We have little hope. Little hope. That's the next generation.
He is not talking about money or fame or revenge on his critics. He is talking about children.
I love them. I love them because I didn't have a childhood. I had no childhood. I feel their pain.
He describes his dream of building the biggest children's hospital in the world, funded by his comeback shows, a place with game rooms and movie theaters, because he believed sick children were often just depressed, and he wanted to give them joy. He says he wants to help 1 million children. He says God wants him to do it. And then he says the line that broke the courtroom. He explains that he loves these children because he never had a childhood of his own, that he feels their pain because he lived it. He talks about children with no mothers, dropped off and left behind, reaching out to him and begging to be taken along. He says helping them will be remembered more than any of his performances ever will. And then he lists his own songs, the ones about healing the world and caring for lost children. And he says something no fan who hears it ever forgets. He says these are the songs he wrote because he was hurt. You know, he says, I hurt. There is a long, painful silence on the recording. Then Murray's voice asks if he is okay. And after another silence, Jackson mumbles that he is asleep. That is where it ends. This is the recording that finally surfaced. Not a shocking confession, not a dark secret, but something far more human. The most guarded superstar on earth, worn down and exhausted, quietly revealing that behind all the spectacle was a wounded man who just wanted to save children the way nobody had saved him. A forensic expert confirmed the audio had been sitting on Murray's own iPhone, recorded on the 10th of May, capturing a private moment the singer almost certainly never imagined the world would hear. And to understand how he ended up in that state, whispering into a doctor's phone, you have to understand the impossible pressure crushing him in the final months of his life. The comeback that became a trap. By 2009, Michael Jackson was in a corner. He was reportedly carrying an enormous mountain of debt, some estimates putting it around $400 million. His finances were a mess. His name had been battered by years of controversy, and he needed one last, enormous triumph to secure his future and his children's future. The answer was, this is it. A concert residency in London announced to the world as his grand return. When the tickets went on sale, the demand was so overwhelming that a planned run of shows ballooned into 50 concerts. 50. For a 50-year-old man in fragile health, who had not toured in over a decade, that number was staggering. It stopped being a victory lap and started being a survival mission. He had to prove, one more time, that he was still the greatest entertainer on the planet. And here is the cruel heart of it. Jackson genuinely wanted to be great again. He was a perfectionist, obsessed with his craft. He threw himself into the rehearsals with real passion, chasing the flawless show he saw in his head. But his body was failing him. He suffered from chronic, brutal insomnia, the kind that no ordinary sleep could touch. He was in pain. He was exhausted. And to force his body to rest so he could get up and rehearse again, he turned to something no person should ever use as a sleep aid at home: a powerful surgical anesthetic known as propofol, usually reserved for use during operations. That decision, made under crushing pressure, would become the turning point that ended his life. But before it did, the cameras were rolling, capturing the last performances of his life. The last time the world saw him dance. Here is the thing that makes This Is It so haunting. Because it was a massive production, nearly everything was filmed. The rehearsals, the staging, the run-throughs, which means the last months of Michael Jackson's life are preserved on camera in extraordinary detail. These are, in the most literal sense, his final recordings. The last footage of the greatest dancer of his generation doing the thing he was born to do. And what those tapes show is a genuine contradiction, which is exactly why they are so powerful. Watch them one way, and you see flashes of the old magic, the timing, the instinct, the impossible grace, all still there in a man of 50. Watch them another way, and you see something deeply sad. A performer who is often visibly frail, shivering, running low on energy, sometimes marking through his moves at half power to conserve what little strength he had left. Sessions that got cut short, days where he simply could not do it. Both things are true at once. He was still brilliant, and he was clearly dying. Let us go through the final numbers he rehearsed, because each one tells a piece of the story, and together they are the last artistic testament of the king of pop. Billie Jean, One More Time. The rehearsal footage of Billie Jean is almost unbearable to watch when you know what is coming. This was the song that made him a global god back in 1983, the night he first did the moonwalk on live television, and the world lost its mind. Now, 26 years later, he returned to it one final time. On the tapes, you can see his professionalism was absolute. He went back over the routine again and again, obsessively refining the timing, making sure his signature moves still landed exactly as they should, that the moonwalk was still perfect. He worked to sync his steps with the band's tempo, drilling the visual cues for his dancers. The discipline never left him, but you can also see the price of it. Between the sharp moments, he looks fragile. He shivers. The fatigue is written all over him. This was a man reaching back across a quarter of a century, trying to summon the electric energy of his youth out of a body that was quietly shutting down. And he very nearly did it. That is the tragedy of the Billie Jean footage. The greatness was still in there, fighting to get out. Beat It and the fight to stay precise. Beat It was built around one of the most demanding routines in his entire catalog. A fight-inspired dance where every single dancer has to move in perfect, aggressive synchronization. For this number, Jackson became a relentless director. The rehearsals focused on total precision. Every movement had to snap in time with the song's driving, aggressive rhythm. He drilled the entrances and exits, the reaction beats, the exact moment each dancer hit each pose, leaving nothing to chance. He worked hand in hand with the band to weave the rhythmic details into the live arrangement. This was a man who understood that the power of a spectacle lives in its precision. But watch closely, and you see his strategy for survival. To protect his fading energy, Jackson often chose not to sing at full volume during these sessions. Instead, he focused on the physical blocking, the pacing, the positioning, conserving his voice and his strength for when it truly mattered. His health sometimes forced him to cut the sessions short, but the commitment never cracked. Even running on empty, he refused to let the standard slip. Thriller, the monster he would not let die. Then there is Thriller, arguably the most famous song in pop history, and the way he approached it for This Is It shows just how much of a perfectionist he still was, even at the end. The song itself has a fascinating history. It was written by Rod Temperton, and it was originally titled Starlight before Temperton reworked it into the horror masterpiece the world knows. For the comeback show, Jackson wanted to transform it into a cinematic, three-dimensional experience, expanding the famous graveyard into a full immersive spectacle, complete with a new film segment shot just days before he died. And here is the detail that tells you everything about his standards. Even in his depleted state, soundboard recordings from the Staples Center show that Jackson refused to lower the key of Thriller to make it easier to sing. Nearly 30 years after he first recorded it, he held himself to Temperton's original, demanding vocal standard. He would not cheat the song. The production even preserved the chilling narration by the horror legend Vincent Price, wrapping the whole thing in modern surround sound. He was bridging the spectacle of the 1980s with the technology of a new century, and he refused to compromise a note of it. If you are enjoying this deep dive into his final days, take a second to subscribe and hit the like button. It genuinely helps. Now, back to the recordings, because the next one hides a piece of pure invention. A conversation with his own childhood. One of the most touching things he planned for the show was a moment with I'll Be There, the Jackson 5 classic, and the way he approached it reveals just how much he was thinking about his own past in those final months. For this number, he wanted to use remastered, high-definition clips of himself as a little boy, back in the Motown days, singing alongside his own younger self on screen. It was meant to be a bridge across 50 years, the fragile 50-year-old man reaching back to the pure, hopeful child he once was. He insisted on soft, warm lighting to give it a feeling of innocence and tenderness. He saw it almost as a way of reintroducing the world to where he came from, to the humble beginnings before the fame swallowed everything. And he was obsessive about the voice. To keep it pure, he chose to sing it stripped down, with almost no backing track. Working with his longtime vocal coach, Seth Riggs, he ran rigorous a cappella sessions just to test how his natural voice carried into the far corners of the arena. With his musical director, Michael Bearden, he pared the whole thing down to gentle piano and soft bass, a quiet, restorative breath, in the middle of a huge, high-energy show. It was going to be the moment where the spectacle stopped and the human being simply stood there and sang. It never got the chance to happen in front of an audience. The industrial fire of Jam. Not every final rehearsal was gentle. For the song Jam, Jackson went in the completely opposite direction, building an intense, aggressive, industrial spectacle for the modern era. He reimagined the track as a kind of urban warfare experience, blending the 90s energy of the original with a harder, more modern edge. He pulled in digital elements from his short film Ghosts and built an aggressive, military-style dance sequence. He worked closely with his musical directors to amplify the track's grinding industrial sounds, the crashing glass, and the heavy, pounding bass, insisting the song should hit like a statement of pure intent. The technological centerpiece was something called the Light Man sequence, where Jackson would wear a special suit covered in thousands of tiny LED lights, making him appear to materialize out of pure electricity, as if stepping straight out of the screen and into the room. It was cutting-edge, ambitious, and unmistakably Michael Jackson, always reaching for the next impossible visual. And even here, drained as he was, he insisted on rapping the complex verses himself, rather than letting anything be fake, using the sheer force of the rhythm to remind everyone that he was still the one in command. Smooth Criminal and the Impossible, Lean, Smooth Criminal is where you see Michael Jackson, the inventor, not just the performer. The song grew out of an early demo, and Jackson built it into a high-stakes noir mystery inspired by the gangster films of the 1930s. He even, famously, digitized his own heartbeat to use as part of the track's pulsing rhythmic foundation. Think about that. The literal beat of his heart built into the song. But the legend of Smooth Criminal is the anti-gravity lean. In the performance, Jackson tilts his entire body forward at an impossible 45-degree angle, far past the point where any human should simply fall on their face. For years, people assumed it was a camera trick or hidden wise, It was not. Jackson actually co-invented and patented a special shoe with a slot in the heel that hitched onto a peg that rose up from the stage floor at the right moment, letting him lean impossibly far forward and then pull back up. He engineered the illusion himself and held a real patent on it. That is the mind we are talking about, a man who did not just dance the impossible. He invented the technology to make it possible and then filed the paperwork. The struggle behind Shake Your Body. Shake Your Body was meant to be pure joy, a high-energy dance explosion, and its rehearsals capture the cruel contrast at the center of these final months better than almost anything else. On paper, the number was flawless. Jackson built tight, demanding routines that required his dancers to move as one, turning raw energy into precise, synchronized formations. When you watch the choreography itself, it is sharp and alive. But the accounts from the production team tell the other half of the story. Behind that sharp choreography was a performer battling severe exhaustion, frequently shivering, his physical state visibly declining and repeatedly breaking the flow of the sessions. To get through it, Jackson often mimed his way through the routines rather than singing and dancing at full power, saving whatever strength he had for the moments that counted most. The live band kept the pulse going, but the sessions were unpredictable, swinging between stretches of complete, dazzling professionalism and sudden painful stops when his body simply gave out. It is a hard thing to watch, because you can see both the master and the dying man in the same few minutes of footage. That contradiction is the whole tragedy of This Is It in miniature. The show was going to be spectacular. The person building it was running out of time. Earth Song, the final performance. And now we come to the most haunting recording of all, because it captures almost the last moment of his life on stage. On the 24th of June, 2009, the night before he died, Michael Jackson rehearsed Earth Song at the Staples Center. Earth Song was his great environmental anthem, a desperate plea for the planet, and he intended it to be the emotional heart of the entire show. And on that final night, witnesses say he performed it with surprising power and vibrancy, a flash of the old fire, mere hours before the end. The staging was breathtakingly ambitious. He planned to use immersive dome technology to project a film of a young girl walking through a destroyed rainforest, blending his music with a message about the Earth. There was an enormous crane, a high-tech prop tank to symbolize the machinery of war and destruction. He wove in his own poetry about the planet. He stood silhouetted against digital flames, turning the stage into a plea for the world to wake up. And then he went home. He returned to his rented mansion around midnight. He would never perform again. That rehearsal of Earth Song, his cry to save the planet, was the last full performance Michael Jackson ever gave. The very next day, he was gone. The final hours. This is the part that is hard to hear, but it is the truth of what happened, pieced together from testimony given under oath. After that final rehearsal, Jackson came home around 12:30 in the morning, still wired and unable to sleep. In his bedroom, which had effectively been turned into a private medical ward, Dr. Murray gave him a series of sedatives through the night, trying to get him to rest. Nothing worked. Jackson's insomnia was a monster. And so, in the late morning, still awake, he begged for the propofol, the surgical anesthetic he had come to rely on to force his body into unconsciousness. Around 10:40 in the morning, Murray administered it. Then, according to the testimony, Murray left the room. And in that window, Michael Jackson stopped breathing. What followed was a chaotic, tragic failure. Murray's bodyguard, Alberto Alvarez, later testified to the disturbing scene. He described Murray attempting CPR, but doing it wrong, pressing on Jackson's chest, while the star lay on a soft mattress instead of a hard surface, which makes chest compressions nearly useless. He described Jackson's young children present, terrified. And most damning of all, Alvarez testified that before anyone called for help, he was instructed to gather up medication vials and an IV bag containing a milky substance, hiding evidence, while precious minutes ticked away. Those minutes, in a medical emergency, are the difference between life and death, and they were spent tidying the room instead of saving him. The 911 call did not go out until 12:26 in the afternoon. By then, it was far too late. The dispatcher on the line urged them to get Jackson onto a hard surface and start proper compressions, but the window had already closed, and the paramedics who arrived were never told about the propofol, so they treated it as a simple collapse, missing the real cause entirely. At UCLA Medical Center, doctors fought for over an hour, throwing every resource they had at him, but nothing could be done. Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at 2:26 in the afternoon on June 25, 2009. He was 50 years old, the day before his comeback was supposed to prove he still had everything left to give. The world stops. The news detonated across the planet with a speed the internet had never seen before. So many people rushed online, searching for confirmation that major websites buckled under the traffic. Google's systems briefly thought they were under attack. Twitter slowed to a crawl. The world was collectively refusing to believe that Michael Jackson could actually be gone. People poured into the streets. They gathered in homes, public spaces, and online, with millions of strangers united in shock and grief, struggling to accept that a permanent fixture of the global soundtrack had suddenly vanished. Whatever people thought of his controversies, his music had shaped generations and served as the backdrop to billions of lives across the world. Songs that once filled stadiums, celebrations, and quiet moments now carried a different meaning, as the man behind them had fallen silent, leaving an unforgettable legacy that would continue to echo through time. On the 7th of July, the world gathered to say goodbye at a memorial service at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, the very building where he had rehearsed his comeback just days before. Nearly 17,500 people filled the arena, and around 31 million watched across the country. Mariah Carey sang. Stevie Wonder delivered a soulful, grieving tribute. Through song, the world let him go. But even as it mourned, a bitter fight was breaking out over how and why he had died. The fight for justice. The death quickly became a legal reckoning. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled that Michael Jackson died from acute propofol intoxication, combined with other sedatives, a lethal cocktail that should never, under any circumstances, have been given to someone in a bedroom instead of a hospital operating room. In 2011, Dr. Conrad Murray went on trial for involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that giving a powerful surgical anesthetic to a man in his home, then failing to properly monitor him, was gross negligence that directly caused his death. It was during this trial that the world heard that haunting slurred recording, the one we opened with. The jury agreed with the prosecution. Murray was found guilty and sentenced to 4 years in prison. He ended up serving about 2 years due to local jail overcrowding policies, and though he walked free, his career was over. His medical licenses were stripped away, and he eventually left the country. For the legal system, that verdict closed the case. Medical negligence, a doctor who failed his patient. But for some of the people closest to Michael Jackson, that answer never came close to the whole truth. The shadow of suspicion. Not everyone in Michael Jackson's family accepted that his death was simply an accident of negligence. His sister, LaToya Jackson, became the loudest voice, insisting it was something darker. In high-profile interviews, she pushed the theory that her brother was the victim of foul play, that the people surrounding him in his final days had created a deadly environment on purpose. She rejected the idea that Dr. Murray acted alone, framing him instead as a fall guy, a convenient scapegoat taking the blame for a much larger conspiracy involving the powerful business interests around his comeback. Years later, in 2017, his daughter Paris Jackson said much the same thing. In a candid interview, she stated plainly that she believed her father was murdered. She pointed to his final, grueling months, and to warnings she said he gave that people were out to get him. Like her aunt, she accepted that Murray was guilty, but saw him as a pawn in a deeper betrayal by those running the "this is it" machine. Now, it is important to be clear and honest here. These are the beliefs and statements of family members, not established facts. Every official investigation concluded that Michael Jackson's death was the result of medical negligence, not a planned murder. There is no proven conspiracy. But the grief and suspicion of his own sister and his own daughter are real, and they have kept a cloud of doubt hanging over his death for more than a decade. When people who loved him this much cannot accept the official story, it tells you something about how strange and pressured his final months truly were. Myths and reality. Michael Jackson's life and death have always attracted wild rumors, so it is worth taking a clear-eyed moment to separate what is actually true from what is invented, because he deserves that honesty. After he died, the internet filled up with theories that he had faked his own death, along with endless supposed sightings of him alive. Every one of these has been dismissed by authorities as having no factual basis whatsoever. He did not fake his death. He is not hiding somewhere. That is fantasy. For years, people also speculated cruelly that he had deliberately bleached his skin to change his race. The truth, confirmed by medical records, is that Michael Jackson suffered from vitiligo, a real and well-documented condition that destroys the skin's pigment in patches, forcing many sufferers to even out their complexion. His changing appearance was a medical reality, not a rejection of who he was. And on the most serious matter, the accusations that dogged the later part of his life, the honest, factual record is this. In 2005, Michael Jackson stood trial and was acquitted on all charges by a court of law. People continue to hold strong and opposing views about him to this day, and that debate is not going away. But the legal fact is the acquittal, and any honest telling has to include it. Separating the documented truth from the swirling myth is the only fair way to look at a life this complicated. What the recordings really left us. So when you step back and take in all of it, the whispered hospital dream audio, the fragile rehearsal footage, the last performance of Earth Song, what do these final recordings actually tell us? They tell us something the tabloids never could. They show a man of enormous, almost impossible contradictions, a perfectionist still chasing greatness while his body crumbled beneath him, a global icon worth hundreds of millions, drowning in debt and pain, a figure surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone, whispering his dreams into a doctor's phone in the middle of the night, and underneath all of it, a person whose deepest wish, even while sedated and slurring, was to build a hospital for sick children, because he knew what it was to be a hurting child himself. That is the real revelation of the recordings. Not scandal, not a shocking secret, but the raw, unguarded humanity of someone the world had turned into a cartoon. The last footage of him dancing is heartbreaking precisely because the genius was still flickering right up to the final night. And the last audio of him speaking is heartbreaking because it reveals a gentle, wounded soul who wanted, more than anything, to ease the pain of others. The show he was killing himself to perfect never happened. He died the day before it all came together. But these recordings survived. And in a strange way, they became a truer performance than any concert could have been, because they show us the man without the mask in his final, fragile, deeply human days. The last recordings of Michael Jackson are not a scandal. They are a mirror, showing a fragile, wounded man behind the legend, still dreaming of helping children as his own light faded. If you liked this, hit like and subscribe, and make sure to check out our other videos.